Well, good morning, everybody. I am up here in the North Woods of Wisconsin today on a family vacation, and I'm using whatever bandwidth I can get over my cell phone. So let's see how we do this morning. This is just a look back yesterday at the satellite data that was across the United States, and we saw once again just another round of very deep convection, but very much isolated into certain pockets. Now we have a much broader low that's moving through this part of the upper Midwest, bringing in cloud cover, quite a bit of cooler air. Just immediately to the south of it, though, we're seeing still the extreme temperatures we've been watching all week. Inside of where the much larger Bermuda high is sitting on top of this region, we've got just isolated convection. But did you notice something? Matt talked about it a bit yesterday. There was this upper level low that was sneaking through parts of Florida. And as it did so, just as I rock back and forth, you can see the east to west trajectory on some of the storms over parts of the southeast. And so it's amazing just to see how closely packed together these two different pressure cells are currently sitting right now. Later in the day, as the sun was setting, we can see some of the wildfire smoke still in Utah, and also down here just south of the border, just south of the Imperial Valley, with the fires that are in the very northern Baja of Mexico. So just again, this is what we're going to be talking about for a while. Just this way of moisture delivery out of the atmosphere. So let's have a look at the storm reports just to kind of catch up here on what I've missed this week. This was on the 25th, just watching, again, multiple rounds of thunderstorms capable of producing very, very strong winds. And again, don't forget, these storms were producing their wind gusts from the east to the west in this particular part of the Carolinas. Andrew covered these tornadoes that were here in parts of Minnesota quite well. And if we look at just yesterday on the 26th, it was once again dotted throughout the country with local severe wind reports and a few tornadoes that were isolated here in parts of Iowa as an example. So we continue to stay on track with this incredibly active severe weather season. I want to talk to you for a moment about the recent precipitation pattern here. This is the last 7 days, and as you just look over it, the ring of fire precipitation pattern is quite evident. So we find this corridor in through here that was extremely active. Remember, we had the low that came through here, delivering rainfall to Canada, which I want to talk more about in just a few moments. But if you were inside of that ring, it was very isolated in the way that the moisture was delivered. And you can almost see the upper level structure to this if you just kind of let your eyes kind of blur a bit over the colors here in the southeastern part of the United States up toward the mid-south. Now, what I want to talk about with this is the Midwest for just a moment, because a video was sent to me yesterday that I'd like to play for you. I got permission to show this to you. But this is just a look throughout the Midwest and how hard that line was on the south and east side of the very heavy rainfall, some of which went through Kansas, Nebraska, clipping parts of South Dakota, a big area in parts of Iowa that got 3, 4, 5 inches of rain, some places more. And then you come up here, this is actually very close to Wisconsin Dells that got some very heavy rainfall too. But I'd like to take you to this spot right in through here. This is like around and north of Grand Island, just as a benchmark for a location. Several places within here received 6 or 7 inches of rainfall. And a video was sent to me by Eric Hunt. So Eric works out at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He's an extension specialist. I hope I got his title right. He's a good friend of mine. I'm going to do a webinar with him later in the month of July. In fact, Andrew, Matt, and I are all going to talk with him and try to assess where we think the rest of this growing season is going to go. But I'd like to play for you the video he sent me. This is not Eric in the video, but this is a grower out in this area. So watch this with me.
This morning I'm out taking sap samples. These will get sent off to a lab here shortly. It's 9 a.m., about 6 hours after a 7-inch rain, and the ground is very, very firm. I'm not even making foot tracks anywhere where I'm stepping. I believe this is a prime example of how soil health pays.
That's a very interesting statement about soil health. And I imagine what he's really discussing here is specifically around the way that the water was able to get into his soil so very, very quickly. 7 inches of rain. I mean, that guy is in this. And there were locally, much, much higher rainfall amounts. If you want to look at it in terms of a percent of normal, now, again, the AHPS data set has been struggling in the western United States for about a month. So these minus 10,000s are just where there's no data. But if you take a look in through here, this is a region that in the last 7 days has had, 500 to 1,000% of normal precipitation. Look at New Mexico, where there's still flooding issues. And then you come just to the south of that line, and we can see how very, very dry it's been, while some folks have been so very, very hot. But I wanted you to see how amazing it is that the soils in the Midwest, when taken care of, can really take water. It's an incredible thing. So I appreciate that video being shared with me, and I hope you found it instructive and interesting as well. Now, farther you go into the Northeast, which has had quite a bit of hot conditions now for a while, although it's much cooler this morning in pockets of the Northeast, they've also missed out on a lot of this thunderstorm activity too. So just kind of getting an idea of how polarizing this last week has been in terms of precipitation and also temperature, which we're going to talk about in a few moments. I did want to give you the latest 16 inch or 0 to 40 centimeter soil moisture data from NASA, just again to find that ring. And I want to identify in this just these pockets that continue to show up drier, and they're mostly south of that line we talked about. Now, I've got a lot of rainfall coming down into this part of Florida in the upcoming forecast, but we do also take note that outside of some of the storms that missed this pocket of the southeast up toward Virginia into the northeast, we still have holes to fill in here. And that can also be said for this part of Texas getting into Oklahoma, which, remember, was so incredibly wet in spring. Now, the Northwest has gotten a break from the temperatures, but there are pockets of drought that are developing. And as you know, some of our longer-term narrative keeps a lot of the Pacific Northwest, pockets of the western side of Canada, and getting into the northern plains of the United States under the potential for drought development throughout the remainder of summer. We'll talk more about that in a few seconds as well. But since I just mentioned Canada, let's go have a look at it, because this low that brought in some moisture to British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and even pockets of Manitoba was critical over the last 7 days, given that this was a very, very dry region up to that point. What is interesting is parts of Manitoba missed, and that's been our pocket in Canada that's been most dry. If I blow this up, this is a groundwater. Let's actually go over to the root zone map. This is the newest root zone soil moisture map. And you can see that this region is still struggling with drought conditions after what was decent rains that came into parts of, again, Saskatchewan and Alberta. Most of British Columbia still very, very dry. And this is going to be a region where we're going to be quite cautious about the risk of wildfires developing later in summer and then possibly getting the smoke to move downstream across the rest of North America. But as you're looking at it, our root zone soil moisture map just shows the deep saturation that is in this section of the United States. We're about to see a pretty sizable change in the southwest as the monsoon gets going. And as we've talked about, we're starting to break that drought problem, especially in Chihuahua here, with better moisture as of late. Now, sticking around on the Canadian prairie for just another moment, I wanted to show you the latest NDVI data for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, because I was a bit surprised to see it this high above the historical average. So you're looking at that red line there. The gray is the envelope from 2001 to 2023, and last year is this line in through here. So it's interesting to see that from satellite, the crop looks pretty healthy in that region. All right. Since we're kind of keeping things international for a moment, I do want to show you what happened over the last 10 days in Europe. It's been incredibly hot from the Iberian Peninsula through France and through Germany, Poland, and then getting over toward, the Black Sea region. But as soon as you cross over just a bit farther to the east, you get into the Russian wheat belt. We've not had that much excessive heat. On the precipitation side of it, we can look at this a lot of different ways. This is a percent of normal over the last 10 days, just to show you that it was quite hot. Other than some isolated storm events that happened around the Alps, it was very, very dry. Okay. And that's what we're seeing here. I said hot, I meant dry a moment ago. Maybe you can see it better if I look at the anomaly map. And there we can really kind of find this. So a lot of Ukraine was included in that dry last 10 days or so. Better rains in the Russian wheat belt, though. We continue to see that in this region. And as we look at the longer term forecast, we still have our longer waves. You do need to take note that the jet stream is pushed pretty far to the north for this point in June. And what I mean is we always watch the jet stream do a northward projection in summer. But this is pretty far to the north so far, meaning we're going to continue to see quite a bit of heat in these areas that are dominated by ridges as we go forward. So we'll talk more about that in a few seconds. But sticking with Europe for just another moment, this is the next 10 days. So again, we're kind of cutting Ukraine in half here, hotter west, cooler east. But much of the rest of the Europe is very, very hot. If we take a look at there we go. These are the precipitation anomalies. Next 7 days is relatively dry. A little bit of storm activity coming through parts of France, getting right over here, southern Germany. This is the model reflecting the overturning that's going to happen due to the heat that will be in the system. So over the next 10 days, you do see much more extensive dryness than you do see then you do see wetter conditions. Okay, back to the United States. It's about 6 a.m. as I started recording this morning, and I want to take note of these temperatures here. So these were overnight low temperatures deep into the 70s. And as you get into the months of July and August especially, some research I did would show that the number of consecutive days above 74 degrees Fahrenheit for minimum temperatures right here in the heart of the Corn Belt, this area I'm circling, tends to have a negative correlation with yield. And I know most of you watching understand that. It's not necessarily a June problem. It is much more a July and August problem. So we need to take a close stock on how these temperatures are behaving. So as it stands, this is the current look at the kind of low-level flow in the atmosphere. And we do have a deep low. You saw the cloud cover a moment ago that's going over Lake Superior. This broad and expansive, like there's one, to call that two, maybe three, I don't know, four different pieces of this very extensive Bermuda high. There it is, all in its glory. And we're going to continue to keep the heat on in this area while the storms run the periphery associated with this deeper low. Now, off the coast of California, incredibly strong winds are flowing out of the north, and this is going to give us some upwelling, meaning these ocean temperatures are going to change a lot in this area of California, which is sometimes a signal we look for to understand maybe what the upcoming months in terms of temperature and precipitation for the rest of the country may be. It's not a signal I can decipher just yet, but one other thing to point out before we go any further, you can see some pretty strong winds in the Columbia Basin coming off the mountains in Montana. We should be aware of that. Getting a good look at it here, just take a look at these winds getting added up today. There they are. Stronger winds here and here. Some in the central United States. But as I play it forward, look at this coastal wind event in California taking shape right now. We're talking wind speeds 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. Very, very rough seas right here. Okay, National Weather Service still has a large area in parts of the Mid-South and Eastern Corn Belt that is under this excessive heat problem. So there's heat advisories that stretch this whole region. And as we just take a look at where we've been as of late, these are the temperature ranks since June 18th. And so much of the eastern, almost 2/3 of the United States, but focusing on this part of the Midwest over toward the eastern Great Lakes, part of the mid-Atlantic down to the southeast, and then all of the northeast has been very hot. So in terms of like a third week of June comparison to history, this is one of the hottest third weeks in June that we do have on our records, which go back to 1893. Now, the West has been cool. We've really backed off on the temperature problem in the West that was so hot during spring. It's now quite cool. But just looking at this, I wanted to kind of decipher a few values. So I very rapidly wrote the code for this morning. Okay, so I apologize. It's an ugly map. My color bar is a mess. But this is a map of stress degree days. And I'm going to work on it, make it better, get you a better color bar. But I want to focus, if you don't mind, on looking at stress degree days as they relate to corn. So what is a stress degree day? Let's zoom in on the Midwest. Again, ignore the color bar. So sorry for the jumbled letters or numbers here. A stress degree day is adding up the temperature above 86. So the easy example is if it's 90 today, you get 4 stress degree days. And Dr. Elwin Taylor did a bunch of research. I think we did it in 2013 out of Iowa State. And he said that if you get more than 140 of these units during a growing season, that you tend to see yield loss. And the more you get, the more yield loss there is. I think we should add something to that research and do a kind of like an overnight stress degree day calculator as well. I'll work on that. But my point is, when you look at these numbers, and again, remembering that the work was done in Iowa, we haven't even started our 2 hottest months for the Midwest, which are July and August. We've got some places that have already got 50 of these in Iowa. We're in the 30s and 40s in Illinois. Same thing over in parts of Indiana. But Nebraska, we've got pockets here that are 118 already. Now, you will easily eclipse that number down in Texas and Oklahoma. Any place down south. But they have a different growing season than when it starts here. We got guys in Texas that plant corn in February. Whereas in Iowa, it's April and May. So just something to think about there when you're looking at this number. But I wanted to show you the impact of that heat lately. So since I mentioned those overnight temperatures were so critical to the success of many crops, here's a forecast of the minimum temperatures. This is this morning. That's tomorrow. We're still keeping these temperatures very high in this area. That's Saturday morning. Sunday morning, very, very warm throughout much of the Midwest, upper Midwest, 4 overnight lows. Look at the heat coming back on in the West. That's Monday, June 30th. Start of the new month, we're going to get a cool down in the central U.S. We'll show you that again in a few seconds. Heat's building back into the west and east. And then we get into Wednesday and Thursday of next week, which will be one day before my favorite holiday, which is the 4th of July. Max temperatures, here's what today looks like. Getting into tomorrow, look at that, back up in the hundreds in Central Valley of California, deep into the 90s in the Midwest, still very hot and steamy out east, except for parts of Maine, which will cool down significantly. This is what's going on Sunday, getting into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Now, looking a little longer, what's this doing overall? Looking at a little bit different variable. With the temperatures staying where they are, I wanted to look at evaporation, and I promise you when I get home I'm going to fix this code so you can see the numbers, but just use the color bar for right now. Take note that throughout the Central Valley of California, we're looking at 2 to 2.5 inches of total evaporation. Same thing for the Columbia Basin. You come down here into the Southwest, these numbers are pretty normal for this time of year, but I want to point out that we're looking at 1.5 inches to 2+ inches of evaporation this week throughout the plains, meaning we're going to have to see what the rainfall looks like in this area if that's going to outdo some of this evaporation. I also wanted to show you the next 7 days of expected GDDs. So this is just a 7-day GDD forecast from the National Digital Forecast Database. And since we talked about it a few moments ago, here are the stress degree days that are being calculated. So now you can kind of see the forecast of these. If you look at the temperature pattern, there's just a lot of mild air, except down here in parts of, Chihuahua, this part up near El Paso, getting into, sections of New Mexico. So next 5 days, here's day 5 through 10. Look at that. Look at the cooler weather here. We're going to watch some upper level lows move through this area. And this is day 10 through 15. And overall, we don't really see a major breakdown of continuous relief from high temperatures in this area. Now, it is not as hot as it's been for the last 7 or 8 days, but there's still quite a bit of just hotter conditions, and we just need to know, is it going to rain in all that heat? So starting off with the severe thunderstorm outlook, I trust me, you need to get in here and look at this closely if you're in parts of the Dakotas and Nebraska today, also around this part of Michigan, getting into Ontario. Tomorrow, keep a very close eye here. And then as we get into the day on Sunday, it's going to move through the upper Midwest. So these are all ridge running type thunderstorms. You can see them very clearly here in the high-res NAM simulation, which you can see yourself at agweather.com. As we play this forward, look at these storm clusters. I expected the mode of convection to be mostly linear, meaning straight line wind issues. Okay? So watch it again with me. This is getting through Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon and evening, getting into Sunday. Just multiple rounds of storms rolling over the top of the way the heat is building into this, into the country right now. That's your typical summer northwest flow thunderstorm pattern. So you can see that right in through here. All right, down farther to the south, looking at wet conditions once again where spring was so dominantly wet. And then here, I mentioned we're going to get quite a bit of rainfall in pockets of the southeast, especially into this part of Florida. We could see very, very heavy rainfalls into parts of southern Alabama and Florida going forward. But as you look at it, we do need to identify, where those holes are, because with summer heat and dryness, you can really find yourself into some very, very quickly evolving drought conditions. I do want to take note of the storms that are projected up and down the Rocky Mountains here. And I want you to also see that throughout the Canadian Prairie, they are expecting to get better chances of rainfall across that region too, getting over into parts of Ontario and Quebec as well. But if we look at some probability maps, let's start on the dry side of things. This is the chance it's staying under a 1/2 inch over the next 7 days. All right, so I'm trying to find, outside of the storms here on the mountains, where we're going to be staying drier in the plains, where we're going to be staying drier in the Midwest, pockets of the Northeast, and this is very much expected in the West. If we flip it over to who's wetter, so this is jump this out for the chance of over 1 inch over the next 7 days. Let's even stretch this out to 10 days. There we go. That's a 10-day forecast of precipitation greater than 1 inch, the probability of it. So it does appear that this is a hot and stormy pattern in a lot of this area. So here's the problem. With these ensemble model forecasts, we will not be able to do a very good job at pinpointing rainfall. So it's kind of just looking at the chance of it. There will be many places in through here that do not catch these storms. They'll just continue to miss your spot, right? And we know that. That's how summer thunderstorm and convection works. So we're going to watch that quite carefully here. If we take a look at the broader pattern as we start to wrap this up, let me just show you something here. As we play forward, look at these cutoff lows we're going to see by July 1st into California. Big ridges start to dominate, but these weaker lows have to be monitored as we go forward in this forecast. Because if we continue to keep, the height lines dipping over here, they're going to have to rise, across the rest of the country. And what I want to know is it hot and is it stormy? So let's go have a look at it here. Let's look at the, there it is, the day 8 through 14 precip pattern. Now look at all these across the top here. Both the GFS and the Euro, so here's the European, there's the GFS, have very similar week 2 outlooks. And this brings us back to this risky area here of being drier, this risky area down here of being drier, where we could be very wet all around the periphery of this region. And I just think we're going to have to monitor it very carefully going forward. I say that every video, but it just, something about the way that precipitation's been delivered with hyperlocal heavy amounts and much broader areas of dryness. I think that's going to be the way that this summer's going to carry out. So is there anything going on in the tropics as we start to wrap this up? Keep an eye on these Pacific once again. And now you're going, wait a minute, what's going on here? No, this is just the model trying to predict where we have low pressure with some sustained winds over 25 knots. Okay, so it's just finding, those areas. So we'd identify the greatest risk for tropical development here. Okay, so I'm going to take you back to the bigger thoughts, right? And I've preached for weeks on this whole Bermuda high problem. When I'm talking to folks in the West, which I'm about to do some work out West, I'll be talking about their Pacific high. But as you play out the next 15 days from the European model, what I'm going to be watching for is anything that just takes the Bermuda high, which is still quite expansive into this area, and just either weakens it or shoves it into Africa or up toward Ireland or Nova Scotia, just somewhere other than this region. And if and when that happens, it's going to start to spell out bigger, broader problems for regional disparity in precipitation across the United States and some yield issues. Now, I'll make that counter argument to the Bermuda high drifting away by showing you what Matt's talked a lot about. And that is, we do see that the ECMWF, both the near term and the extended, try to keep something with the MJO here. This is not a strong teleconnection. We're very clear on that. If all of a sudden, in July, we start to see maybe the MJO bumping out over into phase 1, 2, rather than 4, 5, 6, we're going to have a story. Okay, there's going to be something much more to think about here. And by the way, where I am is I'm on ag-wx.com, and all I did was I clicked on more weather. And you can see all of these maps I find quite useful in deciphering the longer range. I also have the drought monitor and its changes here, which is a critical set of maps to look at. And again, we're worried about this region going into the rest of summer for getting very hot and dry. So one last thing to point out here, okay? If you look at the ocean temperature pattern, I want to make something very clear. We're cooling off on the west coast, but coming out of the north central Pacific toward the Gulf of Alaska, there's still a lot of warm water here. And that is a key determining factor into where ridging is going to set up and be a problem in summer. And as it stands, I think that ridge problem is going to be greatest right in through here based upon this. So it's not a pure west coast, but it's like lee side of the Rocky Mountain Ridge setup. And I got to watch that very, very carefully because of what it means for downstream thunderstorms, where the heat and drought will be. But I'm sure you didn't expect to see much changes in this. This is the newest update for the month of July on precipitation. And again, you know what the European model's been doing. We've been talking about it for weeks. It's got the Bermuda high drifting off a little bit farther and the Pacific high hanging out over here. And it's trying to, I think, to build in the greatest drought risk in this area. Okay? The question marks are down in Kansas. This would be very dry for this region if that does manifest itself. But as you get into July, we have to watch this area for tropical development. What else is going on here? I would expect, coming off the ridge, to have more thunderstorms rolling through that area than currently being forecast. You can probably include more of Missouri in that too. And will this really stay hot and stormy? Well, depending on the position of the Bermuda high, Yeah, it would. If it just slides a little bit farther to the north and east, sure. So the last thing I want to show you is the temperature forecast. 30-day outlook. It's got the same view of where the heat is, and it's also got a relatively active southwest monsoon going. This gets going greatest when there's a large ridge there. All right, big ridge here. We just tend to produce a little bit of high pressure in this area. That helps pull the moisture in like this, and we see a lot of storms in this area. So that's it. I've got plenty to be watching over the weekend. I'll still keep an eye on your weather while I'm spending some time with my family up here on vacation. And all three of us will be talking to you next week. Take care. Thanks.